I had a shortage of space, and I was desperate for more space. And I liked the idea of the work going into an archive. And I liked the idea of the archive in Birmingham because it's fairly local to me. I'd enjoyed talking to and working with Pete, and we both felt that it could be an archive which was active in that I could do things here in relation to the archive. And that hasn't happened as yet because the archive has only just been, catalogued. But I still hope that will happen. And that was important to me. I mean, people said to you, oh, you could get more if you sold it in America, but I don't totally approve of America, so I didn't really want to sell it to America. I ran a portrait studio in Hill Fields in Coventry for 4 years. It was one of the early portrait studios. I don't know why I got the job as manager because I didn't know anything about studios. I didn't know anything about big cameras. The first day I walked into the studio, there was this thing standing in the middle of it looked rather more like a sewing machine than a camera. But I did eventually realise it was a camera. And I was running this studio on my own, and the guy who had just sold it was supposed to come and show me the ropes. He didn't turn up. The first month was agony. And a lot of my customers were Indian, very beautiful faces, and I thought, oh, dramatic lighting. And they would come into the studio, I would give them their prints, they would pay for them, and then they would stand in the middle of the floor and tear them up. Imagine what effect that had on me. I thought, why is this? And I talked to them, they said, oh, well, they want to look white. And I thought, that can't be true. Who is a beautiful brown colour would want to look like us? So I went to the library and I looked at Indian painting, and in Indian painting there's no tradition of chiaroscuro. So in the paintings the faces might be brown or green or blue, but they're an even shade of these colours. So I went back to the studio, I totally changed my way of lighting. I began to retouch the shadows. If they had a heavy 5 o'clock shadow, fine. But that first month I was having nightmares about people tearing prints off. But I haven't got any of those photographs. That's a shame, isn't it?
It is a shame, actually.
And I really feel that I've reinvented myself as a photographer about every 10 years. So I had a period of 10 years when I did documentary work, and that was what first interested me. But then I got to a point where I felt I could no longer do that. I worked in the landscape for 10 years. After 10 years working in the landscape, I decided I couldn't photograph the landscape anymore. Not because I couldn't make the photographs, I could have carried on, and to anyone else they would probably have looked the same, but to me the impetus had gone. So I began working on still life. So there's been that reinvention all the time. So I'd see my work in the archive, in the book, as relating to those particular periods. And the last period, the period that I'm in now, my practice has changed totally, because for the last 7 years I make colour negatives. I take the film to Jacobs for processing and printing, and then I sequence, edit and make handmade books. So my input is in the moment of making the photographs and in that process of sequencing and editing, whereas my black and white work depended very much on control of process, on making my own prints. The process of printing was really important to me.
It's quite interesting, just the words that are used, that John favours certain words and not others. It's nice to reflect that in the catalogue. And there were specific things that I was intrigued by, like, for example, John's notebooks. I mean, I have one here if you're interested in seeing it. It's, I think this is the one that I brought, and I looked at this and I really wasn't sure what it was exactly. So I brought it to John, and all of this, each entry he looked at and he'd say, oh yes, that's the thing, I took that then, and that one I printed, that one I didn't print. So it actually contains a huge amount of information in a very small and condensed space.
78, or let me think, 70. I'd probably been doing photographing for about a year then. And if you look at this, it says 30 times a second, 10 times a 25th, and then the second negative, it's just varied a little. And I can remember this particularly because it's a photograph that I call my walking trees. And I was looking straight into the sunlight, so from where I was standing the trees were silhouetted. It was approximately in N-3 brightness range. So I pre-exposed the negative. When I say that, I mean I exposed the negative to zone 1 on a piece of great card and then did my exposures on top. And it's still a difficult negative to print. And what I was thinking about was the way in which foliage moving in sunlight around a tree was very similar to a similar movement in water. So I was making those analogies between wind and water and the energy of wind and the energy of water. So that's that one.
As I said, it's a small book that contains an awful lot, and you can't bring all of that out in the catalogue.
Always one makes work which you think, well, this will never be an exhibition, but I want it to be something. I hate the idea of a box of unthought about prints under the bed. And the book's the answer to that. This is later, different style of book. Japanese concertina, very easy to make. Just thinking about responding to light coming through my kitchen window. And when I make a book, I'm thinking about the way different images relate, but there are elements of this image which I particularly enjoy, and I can use this method of the mask to highlight that, enriching the process of looking at a book, changing the way of looking at a book. And then it's in a very simple slipcase. It's a very strange sensation because one never really expected to be this old, It's quite a surprise to suddenly realise. And then you realise you've done quite a lot. And it's interesting to look back over it. It's also a bit disconcerting, in various ways. Last week I went to the Stanley Spencer Gallery in Cookham. And I was just totally amazed by the volume of work. And I thought, photography is so easy. All this painting, amazing.